Well, I think part of what happens with creativity is that organizations say they would like creativity, but the reality is that creativity is disruptive and resource intensive, and they don't like that part of it. So you have that push and pull.
We're in search of new rules for work, evidence-based practices fit for a hybrid world. This year, we're hosting a multi-month interdisciplinary research project looking for the best ways of unleashing team creativity. Join me, David Mastronardi, and my New Rules for Work co-producer, Elise Keith, as we explore the minds and the work of the people shaping not just our project, but the new rules for work. This project is made possible through the generous contributions of many people who are volunteering their time and through the support of our partners. To learn more about the project, buy tickets for January Symposium, register your team for the experiment, or partner with us, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you want to get in touch directly, email info@newrulesforwork.com.
Today, we are speaking with Dr. Roni Reiter-Palmon. Roni's a distinguished professor of industrial organizational psychology and the director of IO Psychology graduate program at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. She's also the director of innovation for the Center of Collaboration Science, which I think sounds super cool, and I'm excited to hear more about that. Her research focuses on creativity and innovation in the workplace, team creativity, the development of teamwork and creative problem-solving skills, and leading creative individuals and teams. So naturally, we invited Roni to join our advisory group for the New Rules for Work experiment project, and we're excited to talk about that with her today.
And I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Roni. Where are you calling in from? Where are we speaking to you?
I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm a professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha in the psychology department, and I'm in my office.
And so in the intro, collaboration science.
Yeah.
I always thought collaboration was more of an art.
So what we've done with collaboration science, it's a really interesting project because we realized, in the early 2000s, there were several of us that are doing research from different disciplines on understanding teams and teamwork and how people work together and collaborate, but coming from different perspectives. And we realized very quickly that bringing together all those different perspectives really made a difference in our own research and understanding teamwork and team science and collaboration science. So the Center for Collaboration Science was born, and it includes members from multiple disciplines across campus: psychology, business, computer science, education, public administration, and so on, just looking at different perspectives and different aspects of teamwork.
Are there certain disciplines across campus that you find naturally to be more collaborative or have a disposition for creativity, perhaps?
No, I think creativity manifests itself differently in different disciplines, right? So what you need or what creativity looks like in biology or in math is going to be different than what it is in psychology or art, but that's okay. There are some overarching principles that apply across the board, and then you just take that particular domain and the knowledge from that domain and use it. But the cool thing about the collaboration science is that it's interdisciplinary in nature. And I think a lot of the creative work that we do now involves using multiple disciplines to bring together new insights that otherwise we can't get to.
So in the past 2.5 years, we've had the work landscape really change for us. Through your lens, how have creativity been forced to change, and how have individuals, teams, organizations responded to it? What are you seeing?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you the more anecdotal version as opposed to the scientific version, because the reality is that the science is just not kept up. And what we know about creativity in teams in the virtual world and hybrid world is way too limited. Some of it is specific to the time period of COVID, which is not to be confused with what virtual work is like when we don't have a pandemic and we don't have little kids running at home because there's no school and you're not sitting there in isolation and can't go out or work at a coffee shop. So we have to be careful about generalizing from that research, as interesting as it is. So there are a number of things that are happening that are sort of interesting, right? So with the virtual work, this whole notion of serendipitous events, this meeting by the water cooler, walking in and talking to somebody at the lunchroom that you normally don't interact with, that happens less because Zoom meetings just they're not good mechanisms for that, right? Think about your last in-person meeting. You go into the room, you sit down, you just chit-chat with a neighbor next to you, whoever that happens to be. Think about a Zoom meeting. You walk into, you sit down at your computer, you're in a Zoom room, everybody's staring at each other quietly until the Zoom meeting starts. You don't have these sort of side conversations that both provide the social lubricant for the team, but also allow you to have these unanticipated and unexpected conversations, even potentially about work, that may ignite creativity. It's not that I don't think it's not possible. I think that the systems we're using right now, where we just said, oh, we have a meeting room, everybody walks into the meeting room, we'll just do the same in Zoom, that doesn't work for that purpose. It works great for a regular meeting, but it doesn't work for the pre-meeting stuff. So we're losing some of those natural interactions, and I think we need to find a way to, I don't think remote is going anywhere. Honestly, I just don't think so. And there's some positives about remote work, as a academic, frankly, I've worked one day from home for years because if I come into the office, I can't get any writing done. Any deep thinking that I need to do, which is required for creative work, cannot happen to me in the office. I have too many interruptions. So working from home one day a week was my solution. I think that sort of hybrid work or virtual work is still going to happen. We just need to find a system that allows us to capitalize on the technology and keep some of the things that happen when we meet people in real life happening in the virtual world.
So there are a couple of things there with these natural interactions that we're losing. How is that showing up? Other than we know that we're losing them because anecdotally we're not experiencing them as workers, but how is that showing up for the business?
So that's a great question. And again, we have limited information, but I've seen some research that suggests that those what we call weak ties, so those more like acquaintances, right? People outside of our direct team that we interact with, maybe in other departments and other teams in the organization, those interactions, when you start to quantify meeting time, Zoom calls, phone calls, emails, those start to contract. They happen less frequently. And the potential there is that you have less coordination between those different teams or different departments and less potential for creative outcomes.
This is interesting to me because I know that in the practice world, there is a lot of work that's been done in the last couple of years about orchestrated serendipity, which sounds like an oxymoron in some ways.
Yeah.
But it makes me curious about, part of the reason we kicked off this whole project was because there was a research study done that looked at a clean, narrow question, which is often the case with the research work. You've only got so much data and you could just look at so many things, and came to a conclusion. And then the media went all nuts balls and said Zoom kills creativity and made these giant claims about what the science says. So when we look at things like teams that are practicing intentional serendipity or, completely different ways of dealing with work ties, what would be kind of a scientific way at getting at all of this complexity? And how
Yeah.
should people understand the science when they're looking at these kinds of findings?
Yeah, let me go back to that original study because it's interesting, right? In that particular study, they used a very simple problem or prompt for creativity. And these were not employees in teams, in existing teams. These were people that were brought in for the purpose of this study. One of the benefits that we talk about with remote work and with virtual teams is that you can get experts, right? You can get experts from across the globe collaborating together to solve problems. So in that respect, for example, that study was very narrow, as you mentioned, because it looked at something that really anybody could do, and it doesn't matter. Well, if we're trying to solve, energy issues, COVID, misinformation, terrorism, the next big computer product, whatever the case may be, we're typically thinking about teams that need a degree of expertise that is not available to everybody. And you want the best experts. And expertise matters for creativity. We know that. So in that respect, the study is a little misleading in the sense that you don't need expertise. And they only looked at one aspect of creativity, actually, too, but the focus was on ideation. And we can ask people to generate ideas, and they can come up with all kinds of ideas, and many of them are not workable. And therefore, organizations can't use them. So they might be really interesting ideas in terms of, they're very original, but they're not effective. They don't really solve the problem. And as a result, from an organizational perspective, it doesn't matter. We need, creative ideas from an organizational perspective need to be both novel, right? They have to have that novelty, originality component, but they also have to be useful. They have to solve a problem. They have to be effective. We need to be able to implement them. And if they don't have that component, why do we care? So in that respect, again, that experiment was very narrow, focusing on that ideation stage. And if you look at what happens, we know things happen before we generate ideas. Like, how do we think about this problem? How do we conceptualize it? We could conceptualize problems very narrowly. We could conceptualize problems in a more complex way. And then what do we do with those ideas? Which ideas do we choose to implement? All of those make a difference. And that experiment did not really cover everything. Whereas in real work teams, we spend time thinking about what is the problem we're trying to solve. What are the main goals? We can have 15 different goals, but are there ones that are more important? We generate ideas. We discard ideas that are not good. We keep ideas that are good. We might even combine different ideas into something new. All of that is missing.
I love that you're going into all of the ranges of creativity and how creativity relates to the business world, and how each little piece of science can maybe help us tweak one little part of it or another. But the data around this changing way of work is definitely more complex. So Dave, I think you've got more senses on that.
Well, I wanted to go in so many different directions.
Yeah.
One, though, just maybe as a point of order, I know creativity when I see it, I suppose, but it sounds like you might have at the very least, a working definition of creativity. Yes. Yeah. What do you use? How do you define creativity?
So we use a definition that has been accepted by creativity researchers since the late 80s. And that is that creativity is an idea, a solution to a problem, a product, or a process that is both novel, new, original, as well as useful. So if it's a solution, it solves the problem, right? If it's a new process, then it's more effective than the previous process. It has to have both components. And a lot of lay people focus on the newness and ignore the usefulness piece of it.
How does that apply to art?
So the definition with art is a little different, but even when you think about art, you have two aspects that we use instead of usefulness. One is technical quality, right? So, you could be a proficient piano player or an extraordinary piano player from a technique perspective, right? But the other one is, are you conveying the meaning that you want to convey, right? So if I write a play and my goal is that for people to be introspective and think about their life choices, and nobody sees that and it's perceived as a comedy, I didn't hit the mark. But yes, art is a little different.
So given this changing landscape and with that definition, that makes a lot of sense. What have you seen? Maybe it's anecdotally, you said the science isn't keeping up. What have you seen that's working? Who's getting it right? What are some techniques that are adaptive and they're either preserving or enhancing creativity amongst colleagues?
I have not found the right techniques, honestly. I think we're still in the experimental phase. I think what I have seen is that taking what we do in face-to-face meetings and in everybody's in the office does not work. I'm not sure yet what does. And I think part of it is going to be technology. So for example, I was in a hybrid meeting where some people are sitting around the table all together, and then you have a group, people on Zoom. And from a technology standpoint, most of the rooms that I've been to are just not equipped to manage that effectively. Not everybody's on camera. The microphone doesn't pick everybody up. Some people can be heard, others can't. It becomes an issue, right? So until we build a room that is designed to deal with the being together part, and that when people are together, it's as effective for the people that are away equally, we're going to have an issue. I think there will be technological tools that would facilitate some of those serendipitous events, right? Can we do that? Yes. Are we doing it? No. What do the tools look like? I don't know yet because I have not seen. I think once businesses start to say, here's what we're lacking, technology companies are going to come with solutions, right? But we have to say, we are lacking this. Instead of saying, this is not working remotely, we have to be back in the office. I think the question needs to be, this is not working remotely. How can we make it work? And I've seen some organizations go, it's not working remotely. We need to be back in the office.
Almost because, like, to your point, there's not the tech that would give them the easy solution to have an alternative.
But the tech will not evolve unless organizations ask for it.
This is an interesting challenge because I've run into this quite a lot in my consulting practice. And what I've found is that people have a very difficult time articulating what it is they lack, right? Mm-hmm. How do you articulate emergent serendipity? Yeah. How do you articulate, hey, we're lacking the ineffable?
Yeah. And realizing when we need to be face-to-face, right? So, when we were studying remote teams, virtual teams in the past, pre-pandemic, one of the things we always said was there are points in time in the team's life when the team needs to be together physically. And you have to have a physical meeting, right? So it's important to do it at the beginning so people can get to know each other. And there are certain milestones around which you want to have a meeting face-to-face. I don't think that has changed. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean that you have to be in the office, 5 days a week or 2 days a week all the time. It's recognizing what those milestones are and making sure that people are willing to travel for those and the company's willing to pay for that is what you need to do. And you can still have a more remote workforce.
What are some of the things that you've seen people, organizations try that maybe are missing the mark?
Yeah.
That's maybe even, I don't know, they think they're doing it, but they're not doing it. Or they think
Yeah. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of trying to do social stuff virtually, like virtual happy hours and things like that, which again, try to mimic this notion of serendipitous events, except when you know, let's say you have a potluck in the office. Well, people are clustering together and they're chatting with each other and they're moving and talking with other people. That doesn't quite happen in a big Zoom room, right? So, we've tried breakout rooms and some of them work better than others. And the problem that I have is that it's not that nothing isn't working, is that we just don't have enough information about what does work and under what conditions. That nuance is not there. So it looks like nothing is working quite right. But I think there are some things that we can do with breakout rooms, with, more social events on Zoom, trying to mimic, replace some of what we do in real life. But again, we need to try them out. We need to document them, and we need to know, where are they helping, under what conditions, what are they good for? Some of them might be good just for creating stronger social bonds and developing trust and relationships, which eventually may influence creativity, but may not have a direct effect.
You talked about the original study maybe as
Yeah.
the impetus for this. Why did you say yes to being an advisor for this study? What's exciting for you here?
It's exciting to me that we can have real teams working on real problems. And while from a scientific standpoint, it makes it more complex and in some ways more difficult, it also makes it more real and more realistic. And when we talk about a complex phenomenon like creativity, that's important. We need both, right? It's good to break things into their small pieces and understand each piece separately. But eventually, we also need to put everything back together and see what works in a less artificial way. So from that perspective, that to me is very exciting. I also like the idea of trying different things and seeing what works, because, as I said, I'm not getting a sense from my industry contacts that they've figured out what works, right? So I don't know that we'll give them the magic bullet, but if we could find some things that work under certain conditions, at least we can do something more than just, I don't know, let's try.
Yeah, it seems like we had a big trial phase, and we kind of, to your point about the happy hours, I think we did it. We were excited about it. It was novel because we were just trying to connect in any way that we
Right.
could from our quarantines. But I think there was always that somewhere in the back of our minds that we knew there's something just missing from this,
Yep.
right? And I think we're at the point where we can call a lot of things that works, doesn't work, but we might still be trudging forward with them. It seems like we need maybe something definitive, or somebody's looking for somebody to say definitively, scientifically, this works, this doesn't, and then maybe we'll see some policy adoption or adaptation.
And by the way, an example of something that does seem to work, it may sound silly, but when I talk to folks that do a lot of computer engineering, technology development, and so forth, one of their big issues was whiteboards. They love the whiteboards. They want to write stuff on whiteboards. Well, Zoom now has a whiteboard. They love that. It didn't exist before. It exists now. It exists because there's the demand, but they found it enhanced their virtual meetings. There are these techniques that we can use with technology that maybe mimic other things that we have in our office environment, like a whiteboard, using sticky notes, virtual sticky notes as opposed to paper sticky notes. All of those things can work. It's just, again, a matter of understanding when and how.
I think one of the other things we learned, and that it will be fun to explore, and I'm curious about how this might show up in the experiment data, is work for whom?
Mhm.
Right. All of that nuance of context. David, you were talking about that. We have that thing in the back of our mind that maybe this isn't quite right, but there have always been people who could never make it to the bar,
Right.
and they can make it to the Zoom room, and you can bring tea and do your celebration if you don't drink, and you can, all of those kinds of adaptation really do open up things that did not exist in our landscape of data at all before. So
Yep. And again, I think the notion that you could gather experts and you're not limited to a geographical location that may, in some cases, if you're talking about the coast, price people out, or people don't want to live in big cities or don't want to live in rural areas. Now, world is your recruiting domain. And in some cases, the expertise trumps everything else.
just a little color note on that. We've opened registration for the symposium, and it's been exciting to see the list of countries grow
Mhm.
in terms of where people are coming from. Like they're from Egypt and Norway and Australia and Canada and India and South Africa, and what an interesting opportunity to combine
Well,
and collide perspectives.
And I think, for me, one of the things that I noticed that happened during the pandemic is that my collaborations, I've always collaborated with people that are not local, but in some ways it became easier because we've all accepted this tool of we're going to just do a virtual meeting. So somehow that removed a barrier that we had in our minds as opposed to anything real. And I'm doing a lot more collaborations outside my university and internationally.
Let's say a year from now, we're having this call, and this experiment goes extremely well, better than you could ever have imagined. What is that? What describe for you what overwhelming success looks like?
It's two things. One is just a basic understanding of what works and what doesn't work for virtual and hybrid workplaces and under what conditions, and as Elise said, for whom, right? I think our basic information is lacking at this point. But then seeing new approaches and new tools that facilitate, in my case, my area of interest is creativity. So what are those new tools and new approaches that facilitate creativity and innovation in teams that we don't have now? What has developed over this year that we can then take and use in other places?
For those looking to develop along with whatever these new methods are going to be, what's a job skill, Roni, that you think is going to be critical to get right over the next 5 years?
Well, I think part of what happens with creativity is that organizations say they would like creativity, but the reality is that creativity is disruptive and resource intensive, and they don't like that part of it. So you have that push and pull. And the organizations that are successful resist the negative aspects. So they accept that creativity is going to be disruptive. They accept that it's going to be resource intensive. They're going to provide those resources. They are going to facilitate the effective work environments that include positive leadership, support for creativity, but also support for people. Because you can't be creative when you're stressed or worried about paying your mortgage or roof over your head or where the meal is going to come from, or kids in school being bullied or whatever the case may be. I hope to see more organizations moving toward that understanding. And I think there's a much more pressure from employees to be treated well and given the opportunity to be creative which currently in some organizations you don't have.
Constraints help with creativity, but not the kind of constraints that you talked about, I guess the stress,
Yeah.
right? To be able to address the other business constraints, consumer
Right.
constraints, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's not that creativity has to be constraints free. We all work within constraints. And actually, when we give people too much freedom, that's not useful either. But, it's one thing to be worried about, am I developing the right product versus, will my kid get beat up? Those are very different stressors. And also, I think we sort of glamorize this. We could be creative under stress, what I call the MacGyver approach, right? 1001 uses for duct tape. And under those kinds of stressful conditions, occasionally people rise to the occasion and come up with creative ideas. But the reality is, what we're finding is that most of the time, they don't. When we're stressed, we go back to what we know works because that's the easiest, least resistant path. And when we do what we did before, that's by definition not creative.
But all too often accepted,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Roni, if people want to go learn more about your work, what you do, creativity in general, where can we send them?
Send me an email.
Okay.
I'm also on Twitter at RRP Creativity, LinkedIn.
Well, thank you for this, Roni. Thank you for being an advisor and shaping this project. We're excited about what's going to kick off in January.
Me too. I'm thrilled.
Thanks for listening. To learn about the new rules for work, purchase tickets, or submit your team for an experiment, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you're interested in partnering, reach out to us at info@newrulesforwork.com.